Lee sings. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It's Labor Day weekend. No one's seen Leslie Fry or Todd Whitley because they've been spending all day packing away their white shoes tearfully. Repeating over and over the scripture from Jeremiah 8:20. The harvest is past, the summer is over, and we are not yet saved. Jim Walker, a member of our church, put on his Facebook, and by the way, I think he's sort of like the Dorothy Parker of Dallas with his quips, said, "Why is everybody so sad pretending summer's over? It's Dallas. It's going to be hot here for 3 more months." It still is a marker in time, this end of summer. And I want to offer this sermon to anyone who labors, who works. It's Labor Day weekend. For the work that you do counts. It matters. It may not feel like it, that your employer values the work that you do, but it does matter. For the work that you do that no one sees, it matters. For the work that you do that doesn't feel like it's making a difference, it matters. For people looking for work in our prosperous country and who are discouraged in their quest, you matter, whether you have a job or not. For people who do jobs that are meaningful to them, work that is real, as Marge Piercy says, this is for you. For people who work at jobs that aren't meaningful to them, but they do it in order to have free time to do work that is meaningful, it matters. For people who go to work when they're tired in order to provide for themselves or people that they love, it matters. You matter. All labor is sacred. I love the epistle scripture that says, "Be ye steadfast, immovable, knowing that in God your labor is not in vain." Steadfast, immovable, your labor is not in vain. This is the end of summer. Tomorrow's Labor Day. We forget that it has a political meaning as well as a social holiday meaning. I want to lift up the people who will be serving in the We Care pantry tomorrow, because it's a holiday, and hungry people are hungry every day. So thank you for your labor on Labor Day. This week has anniversaries that are important. They're not 50-year anniversaries, so we don't pay that much attention to them. I'm thinking of the 51st anniversary on August 23rd of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. James Baldwin said in 1963, "We're celebrating racial freedom 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and it's 100 years too early." I'm thinking of Coretta Scott King, who said about that day that as Martin was speaking, this is what she says in her autobiography, his voice soaring magnificently over that great crowd and over to all the world, it seemed to all of us there that day that his words flowed from some higher place through Martin to the weary people before him. Yea, heaven itself opened up, and we all seemed transformed. That labor is not complete yet. I'm thinking that this is the anniversary this week of Emmett Till's death, a 14-year-old who lost his life this week in 1955 an African-American young man in Money, Mississippi, because he flirted with a white girl or was accused of that. And so he was lynched and his killers exonerated by a jury of their peers, not Emmett Till's. I'm thinking that that work is not over and that the events in Ferguson, Missouri remind us not to forget Emmett Till and not to forget Michael Brown. If you are weary of the work of justice, I remind you that in God, your labor is not in vain. Jesus shares these words from Matthew's gospel with the disciples just after kind of a high moment. You know, the Jesus of Matthew's gospel is a little severe. He's a little dour. It's not always easy to preach when you're in the lectionary cycle from Matthew's gospel, because week after week, everything is doom and gloom and the world is ending. And you prefer, sometimes as a preacher, to be able to say, and this week, Jesus said, everything's great. God is love, keep doing what you're doing. But I'm not finding that in my Bible. Those pages fell out. Jesus is having an exchange with the disciples just after a moment where he had said to Peter, I like your style. You're the rock on which I want to build this religious movement, this renewal movement. Your leadership is just the kind of leadership that belongs in our attempt to renovate, renew, retrieve, restore religion to its real purpose, which is to liberate people. And then it picks up with this passage. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples, does it say, about their great triumphs and victories that they'll be experiencing shortly and how they'll see the good effects of their work? No. Matthew says, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. So that's not a great pep talk before you go out onto the field. But I think there's a truth in it that they needed to hear. Jesus was saying to them he would go to Jerusalem. They weren't going to coast on their victories, but he would go to Jerusalem, not where they were. Jerusalem, the center of power, the center of religious and political authority. It would be like going to Washington, D.C., or going to the Vatican or something. He wasn't content with where they were. And he says to them, and I'm going to experience great suffering. And this is Matthew's gospel, so he has a particular perspective. I want to say this in a very nuanced way, but he says it's the elders and chief priests and scribes who will be causing this, meaning it's religious people, church people, in short. It's hard to say it in church, but Jesus in other incidents warns them about political authorities or others, but there's something about religious people that he cautions them about. If you speak truth, it will have a consequence. And he says he might even be killed, but he also adds that on the third day, be raised. We hear so much about the sufferings and about the death that sometimes we overlook that he also promised resurrection. My favorite Bible commentary is called The Gospel in Solantiname by Ernesto Cardenal. Solantiname is a town in Nicaragua. During the revolution there, Ernesto Cardenal, a priest, worked with campesinos, they're called in Spanish. There's no good English American word translation. People who don't have property, people who don't have power, people who were oppressed, the 99%, which in Nicaragua at that time was an actual percentage, an accurate percentage. They were told that the church sided with the powerful and that God was on the side of the rich and powerful. That's why there was a church, and that's why they were in power. Their authority was a sign that God confirmed the social order. Ernesto Cardenal said, no. That's not the message of this book. And he plunked the Bible down in the middle of them and encouraged them to read it themselves from their own experience and to seek inspiration for liberation in it. My favorite character or person, they're not characters, they're actual people. You get to know them in the course of this book, which has the weekly Bible reading from Mass. There's a woman named Olive whose daughter was killed in the liberation struggle, but she refuses to dress in mourning. And she points to this verse and says, there will be suffering and they will be killed, but on the third day they will rise again. She kept the memory of her daughter alive, not through mourning, but through living in the power of resurrection and believing that their struggle would be vindicated, that no labor, no suffering was in vain. On the third day, they will be raised. Though there are consequences to challenging authority, there is also a promise of resurrection and new life. We have to hold on to that piece. So this is how Jesus begins his pep talk. It's a little off-putting. But Peter, the one that Jesus had just said, I like your style. You're my rock. Peter says to him, he rebukes him. God forbid. We don't want this to happen to you. And Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block. Remember, he had called him the foundation stone. He turns it around, as only friends can do when they disagree sometimes. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Now, these are harsh words. It shows how much they love each other, that they resort to these strong emotions. Peter does not want Jesus or any of them to suffer. And Jesus does not want them to lose their momentum or compromise their integrity at this critical moment in their commitment to liberation, personal, social, religious. And so he responds with equal fervor. I wish that Jesus had learned in Sunday school, we don't call people Satan when they disagree with us. It's not nice. Because it's not. When we disagree with someone and we resort to name calling or seeing them not as human but as some incarnation of evil outside of ourselves, as if we are not ourselves capable of it, that's what I think Satan means. When we say Satan, we're displacing the capacity for evil or for shortcoming that we have in ourselves. This is not Jesus' finest moment, but I think it's a common expression, a little bit like bless your heart, among religious people. Satan, get behind me. And really what he wants to say is, don't tempt me when you, of all people that we've been working with together, tempt me. I find it very hard to say no. But Peter also has the right to say to Jesus, I don't want to lose you. I love what we're doing together. I've never felt more alive. This is work that is real. And I hope it won't come to an end. So there they are, arguing back and forth. And Jesus says, no, that's a diversion. It's a stumbling block. You have your mind on divine things, not on human things. I was reminded of Frederick Douglass's statement in the 19th century, 1850s, about when he made this observation in an essay. Frederick Douglass was an African American, born a slave, won his freedom, became not only an anti-slavery activist, abolitionist, he was not a pacifist in the simplest terms. He also was an advocate for women's suffrage, one of the few men to speak at the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention. In the 19th century, only property-owning white males could vote. And all the laws tried to sustain that. We're still working for voting rights, aren't we, for people? This is what Frederick Douglass said when people said, let's just take our time and not be too much in a hurry to achieve these changes. Usually it was white people who were saying this to him, and he had been a slave. He said, those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are those who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. Find out just what people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. That was Frederick Douglass 160 or so years ago, but it could be the words of Jesus to Peter, and frankly, it would have been more polite if Jesus had said that rather than calling Peter Satan. Hard words. But we know that there can be a consequence to standing up for the truth that does not invalidate the struggle. Martin Luther King was assassinated not because he fought for racial integration, not because he opposed the war in Vietnam, which he did, but because he was fighting for workers' rights in Memphis, Tennessee, when he was assassinated. He was there to organize sanitation workers who carried signs that said, "I am a man," because they needed to believe it, and the people in power refused to believe it. On Labor Day, I want us to remember that Martin Luther King, advocate for civil rights and peace activist, lost his life for advocating for workers. Jesus goes on to say, if you want to become my followers, you have to deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. If you want to save your life, you'll lose it. And if you lose your life for my sake, you'll find it. What will it profit you if you gain the whole world but forfeit your soul? Those words mean something. We all know what it's like to make a compromise that kills a little bit of us inside. Jesus is saying, don't do it. Stick to your principles and stick with each other. What if Peter had said to Jesus, instead of don't do this, I'm going to stick with you through this, no matter what. We're going to do this together. We have some power in our relationships with each other, too, to strengthen, to confirm hope. I said this in the early service, but I want to say it at this one, too, because so many people spoke to me at the door afterwards because I shared this detail. I never know how much to talk about my personal life, my true inner personal life. I hope I do it in a way that is upbuilding. I know what it's like from living with a chronic illness, HIV, to want to give up hope, to say, I, after 20 years, am sick and tired of taking these medications. I can't stand the side effects. I can't stand what they do to my body, even though I'm alive. 20 years now, way past my pull date originally. There are times when I want to say, I'm just done. I'm done with taking them every day. And I know that there are other people here who have that struggle. I talked to someone afterwards the early service who hadn't been taking their medication for a while. Go see your doctor. You can take it again. You might have to change it, but you can go, you can take it. Rather than saying, "Get behind me, Satan," when I look in the mirror in the morning, because I'm talking to myself, here's what I do. Last year, on World AIDS Day, I heard Denise Lee sing, "I Didn't Know My Own Strength," the song that she's going to sing at the offertory. And those words came at just the right time in my personal health situation, so that even in the midst of feeling exasperated and exhausted, I decided to sing in my head, sounding like her, which I don't. But I heard her sing it on World AIDS Day, and it stuck with me. I didn't know my own strength, and I crashed down and I tumbled, but I did not crumble. I got through all the pain. I didn't know my own strength, survived my darkest hour. My faith kept me alive. I picked myself back up, held my head up high. I was not built to break. I didn't know my own strength. That's a better prayer than "Get behind me, Satan." And I'm sharing it with you because it might be helpful to you. Jesus said, don't give up, even when you can't see the good effect of your work, or even if you're afraid you won't succeed in the struggle that you're committed to. This is how he concluded this passage. The human one is coming with angels in the glory of God and will repay everyone for what they have done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing who will not taste death before they see the fulfillment of what we hope for. I love this. It acknowledges that we don't always see the results of the work that we do in our personal lives, in social change movements, but it also promises that there are some alive now who will see it. It might not be us. It could be. It might be others. This is what it means to think about divine things, not human things. Not just about ourselves, but about others. It vindicates the struggles that we make. Emmett Till's mother despaired after her son's killers were exonerated by an all-white jury. She said there was nothing left for her to do. And yet, she noticed, this is what she writes in her memoirs, by December, in Montgomery, Alabama, something was happening. She's referring to the Montgomery bus boycott and Rosa Parks' arrest. She says, the spark of Emmett had caught fire. Another mother figure would warm our hearts, nurture our spirits, inspire our work. I had been there at the center of the media storm, and I understood what she was experiencing. I knew the tests she would have to endure. I knew these things, and I reached out to her. I did it quietly. I did it privately. I did it through prayer. She went on, Mamie Till Mobley, whose son died at 14, who did not live to see the liberation that she worked for. She went on to teach children and to teach them by memorizing Martin Luther King's speeches. This is what she said in November of 1989. We cannot afford the luxury of self-pity. Our top priority now is to get on with the building process. My personal peace has come through helping boys and girls reach beyond the ordinary and strive for the extraordinary. We must teach our children to weather the hurricanes of life, pick up the pieces, and rebuild. We must impress upon our children that even when troubles rise to 7.1 on life's Richter scale, they must be anchored so deeply that though they sway, they will not topple. Children alive today who will see what we might not. That's Jesus' promise. This week, Thursday night, Todd and Jeff and I were at a meeting here at Cathedral of Hope of immigration activists from across North Texas. They came to Cathedral of Hope to meet because there's a family detention center that's been here since 2011. That's women and children who are in immigration jail awaiting deportation proceedings. 50 miles from here in Cleburne. Claiborne, not sure how to say it. It's not that far. They told us that women who are nursing receive 1 bottle of water per day while in immigration jail. That's not enough. We're organizing a trip to that family jail, that family detention center, and I'm hoping there are 10 people here who will want to go to see what we can do to make a difference so that the children growing up in immigration jail in Texas will get to see what maybe their parents or their grandparents did not live to see. This week, I was so moved by Reverend Al Sharpton's eulogy for Michael Brown at the service in Ferguson where he was buried. He too echoes the words of Jesus when he says, Michael Brown must be remembered for more than disturbances. He must be remembered for this. This is where they started changing what was going on. Oh yeah, there have been other times in history that became seminal moments, and this is one of those moments. And this young man, for whatever reason, has appealed to all of us that we get to solve this and not continue this. All of us are required to respond to this, and all of us must solve this. The words of Jesus are so important that they keep being uttered in every generation to inspire us to real work that makes a difference, whether others see it or not. Today, Labor Day weekend, I remind us all, be steadfast, immovable, knowing that in God, your labor is not in vain. Amen.